This is Ross Feingold on Taiwan Hashtag, coming to you from Taipei, Taiwan, hosted by the Storm Media Group. Today we're back to presidential politics. Presidential and legislative elections on January 11th, 2020 are less than 100 days away. And speaking of away, it looks like Han's poll numbers, Mayor Han Kuo-yu of the Kuomintang, his poll numbers are falling away. They keep falling behind President Tsai, Ing-wen. A big turnaround from earlier this year when Han Kuo-yu had much stronger poll numbers. Back then, it looked like it might be a three-candidate race. All the candidates, President Tsai, Han Kuo-yu, the rumored candidacy of Mayor Ing-wen of Taipei, or business tycoon Terry Guo Taiming of the Honhai Foxconn Group. They were all bunched around the high 20s, low 30s. Either one of the three seemed to have a chance at winning. Guo Taiming lost the Kuomintang primary. There were rumors he was going to run as an independent candidate. There were rumors Mayor Ko was going to run as an independent candidate. It didn't happen. So now it looks like two significant candidates, notwithstanding a few minor candidates as well. Two significant candidates, Mayor Han and President Tsai. President Tsai's poll numbers have been increasing steadily ever since she won the DPP primary and Han Kuo-yu won the Kuomintang primary. Why? She's just been a better campaigner. She's been articulating policies. She's been talking about her policy successes over the past 3 years that her government has been in office. Her premier, Su Chang, has also been a very effective administrator of the central government. He's also been a very effective spokesperson as far as articulating what the successes of the government have been. And some might say he's even been more effective than President Tsai herself. President Tsai, you might want to watch out for that. You don't want to be overstaged by your premier. However, the key thing here is as the election gets closer, Han Kuo-yu has not been closing the gap. The gap seems to be stabilizing at around 15 plus points. Let's look at the latest poll. Here it is, 48.7 for President Tsai, 31 and change for Han Kuo-yu. Mayor Han, you really are doing a bad job of telling the voters why they should vote for you. Again, most polls are showing this kind of gap. The numbers might be slightly different, mid-40s to high 20s, for example. Not many polls have Tsai breaking 50, only a few do. She did win 56% in the 2016 election, so this is a bit of a loss. I think the key for President Tsai is if she could break 50 in the election, it's a success. You have a lot of political capital. You in your second term with 50%. During the previous presidency, Ma Ying-jeou, he won his first term also with the number in the high 50s. He won his second term with 51. So if you're President Tsai, that's your goal. You want to be 50-51, kind of like President Ma in his second term. You'll take this. You'll take 48 versus 31 as a re-election as well. Ideally, you'll break 50. She's getting close, though. She's peaking at just the right time. You don't want to peak too early in a democratic election. You want to have the momentum going into Election Day. Clearly, it's with President Tsai right now. Again, most polls are showing this kind of 15-point gap. So what can Han do about this? Well, the first thing he did was he took a holiday. Well, we shouldn't really call it a holiday, but he's taken a leave of absence. He's taken a leave of absence from his duties as mayor of Kaohsiung. This was very controversial that he even sought the nomination, but people said, look, you got a full-time job. You haven't even been mayor very long. You became mayor as a result of an election last November. You were sworn in on December 25th, 2018, so you've been mayor for less than a year. Now you're going to run for president. How can you do both at the same time? And initially he said, I can do it. I can handle it. I'll campaign on the weekend. I'll campaign when I'm not fulfilling my mayor duties as mayor of Taiwan's second largest city. It seems like either he couldn't do it or his falling poll numbers have prompted the mayor to say, you know what, I'm going to have to take a leave of absence for the final couple of months, so about 10 weeks or so until Election Day. He's taken his leave of absence. He's going to focus on running around Taiwan in his run for the presidency. He's already kicked that off. He's trying to visit small towns, very similar to what Ma Ying-jeou did way back in 2008 when he ran for president. He did something that he called the homestay, where he lived with the average family, lower middle class folks, to try and understand what their needs are, what their concerns are going into the election, what they want out of the next president. So Mayor Han, he's trying to follow in those footsteps by going around Taiwan, meeting the voters, What else does this mean? It means he's not running to the United States. Yes, there is now a pattern in recent years of presidential candidates in Taiwan going to the United States. They go to Washington, D.C. They meet with the think tanks. Think tank people, you know who you are. They meet with the think tank people who seem to bless their candidacy and say, oh, this person, they know what they're talking about, so they'll be okay as a president. They meet with U.S. government officials at the State Department, at the Defense Department, at the Commerce Department, White House National Security Council. They seek the blessing of those officials as well, for those officials to say, yes, this person will be an okay president of Taiwan. They'll be an okay partner in the United States. So there are many examples of Taiwan presidential candidates trying to do that either in the year or the months before the presidential election. Presidential election used to be in March, now it's in January. So usually these visits occur around this time of year, between August and November. Eric Julie Lun, who was the replacement candidate of the Kuomintang in the last presidential election in January 2016, after he became the nominee, he took this trip to Washington in November 2015, made no difference to his candidacy at all. It was a very short trip, in and out of meetings with different U.S. government agencies. They didn't really criticize him, U.S. government officials, but at that point, it was pretty clear he was going to lose and lose big, which eventually happened. So, Mayor Han, what could you accomplish by going to the United States? Well, it appears that his advisors persuaded him there isn't much to be gained. Your falling poll numbers means you got to stay here and improve your poll numbers and meet the voters in Taiwan, not the voters at the think tanks or U.S. government agencies in Washington, D.C. Is it a good choice? Time will tell. It might have also been the safe choice. Why? According to media reports, the United States government, when they haven't confirmed this, but according to media reports here in Taiwan, the United States government had 5 questions that they expected Han Kuo-yu, Mayor Han, to answer if he came to Washington, D.C. to present himself and seek a blessing as the candidate to be president of the Republic of China and Taiwan. What were those 5 questions? First one was, well, if you are elected president, how are you going to not ensure that Taiwan's economy is overly reliant on China? That was one of the accusations against Ma Ying-jeou, that over time he positioned Taiwan's economy by signing trade and other types of agreements with China to be overly reliant on China. And in 2016 or the 2015 election campaign season, Tsai Ing-wen campaigned on, I am not going to be so reliant on China as a president. My economic policies will encourage Taiwan to be less reliant on China, more reliant on Southeast Asia. She's tried to implement that policy with some degree of success as far as exports or where Taiwan's investment is going. However, China still remains Taiwan's largest trading partner. So at some level, she hasn't really reduced that reliance. But that was one of the questions for Mayor Han. The second question is, how can you prove to the United States that you can better handle cross-strait relations between Taiwan and China than Tsai Ing-wen handles them? Look, we know that in the Trump administration, there's a lot of satisfaction with how President Tsai has handled Taiwan's relations with China. They like that she's standing up to China. She's not rushing into agreements. She has not said, yes, I agree with China's framework for Taiwan-China relations, what people call the 1992 consensus. She often speaks about China's bullying, China's interference in Taiwan, how we don't want Taiwan to become a part of China as long as it's an authoritarian state. So this kind of policy towards China has been very effective in improving the relationship between her government and the current government in the United States. So that would have been an important question for Mayor Han. Maybe the most important one is, how would you handle cross-strait relations different or better than Tsai Ing-wen has? And chances are Han would have said, my policies are going to be very similar to Ma Ying-jeou's policies. I do support the 92 consensus. Han is on record of saying that. So if he had gone to Washington, he would have reiterated that and said, look, that is a more peaceful way to handle relations. Whether or not the U.S. would have been happy with that, we don't know. Third question is, if China wants you to sign some kind of peace accord between China and Taiwan, how are you going to resist this demand from China? It's a very good question. We know that Han, in some of his public appearances, has said, look, I'm not going to rush into a peace agreement. He said, I'm not going to accept one country, two systems. He even said, over my dead body. So chances are he would have just said, that's not on my agenda right now. But that was one of the questions the U.S. would have asked. How are you going to push back on pressure to sign a peace agreement? The fourth one was, how will you resist China's interference in Taiwan's election. Now, that might have been a struggle for Mayor Han. We know that one media outlet in particular, Zhongtian CTI, has been a very big supporter of Mayor Han. They were fined by the government, in fact, for that very reason, right? The Taiwan government said, you're giving too much coverage to Mayor Han. It's not proportionate to your coverage of other politicians here in Taiwan. So there are some media that are perceived, or they might actually be, too favorable to Han. So there's this perception that he has too cozy a relationship with China, and maybe he wouldn't be outspoken in saying, China, don't interfere in Taiwan's election. I expect Mayor Han would have said, the voters can decide for themselves. It's not an issue of China's interference. It might not have been an effective answer to those in the United States government who do believe that China is, in fact, interfering in Taiwan's election. We'll certainly be looking for evidence of that in the coming months. We'll be looking for whether the Taiwan government and prosecutors actually bring criminal charges against anyone in Taiwan. They really haven't done that for the 2018 election, even though the government here has repeatedly said that China interfered in the 2018 local election in Taiwan. Haven't been many criminal prosecutions for that, so we'll be watching for that in the coming months. The fifth question that the United States supposedly expected Mayor Han to answer had he visited Washington, D.C. is, will you still be supportive of U.S. military sales or the proposed purchases that Taiwan already has requested? And that might be the ones that are currently in flight, such as the M1A Abrams tanks, the F-16V fighters. These are very expensive, very large programs. The budgets are going through the legislature here in Taiwan right now. Mayor Han hasn't really been critical of those, so maybe the question would have been looking at the go forward. What would be the next series of requests that Taiwan's military will be making to the U.S. government? And will Mayor Han, if he becomes president, will he be supportive of these large military purchases? There is a perception in Washington that the Kuomintang has been reluctant to invest in Taiwan's military because they don't want to antagonize China. Again, that would have been a very tough question for Mayor Han to answer. He probably would have given a general response that I am all for Taiwan's defense, but maybe he wouldn't have gotten into conversations about specific platforms or systems. Anyway, he's not going. We'll have Mayor Han here in Taiwan for the coming weeks and months up through the presidential election on January 11, 2020. So we'll be talking about this, of course, on future episodes of Taiwan Hashtag. I'm Ross Feingold. Thank you for watching.